So let's get underway now with company number 3 out of the 4 that we'll be hearing from. The company is called ATM Direct. They are user-downloadable software to allow for PIN debit payments over the Internet. And we welcome their president and CEO, Nandan Sheth. Nandan, go ahead.
Good morning. Can everyone in the back hear me well? For those of you wondering, I'm actually not sitting down. I'm just a little vertically challenged, so let's clear that point up. Secondly, it is truly an honor and a privilege to have made it to the finals of the 2008 GRA and TAG business launch competition. In these changing and challenging economic times, it is truly inspiring to live in a city that promotes grassroots entrepreneurship and innovation. Whether we win or not, it's been a terrific experience. I've been in the financial services and payments industry for close to 15 years. I'm one of the founders of our new company, ATM Direct. After moving to Atlanta 9 years ago, I've truly been the beneficiary of the talent that exists in Atlanta. I have been blessed and have been involved with 2 very successful young companies that we grew, just like this one, from very few people and created close to 300 jobs in the process. Our objective is to do the same with ATM Direct. Today, we're going to give you a brief overview in the 20 minutes allotted to our company, our business model, and our value proposition. My colleague, Danielle Duclos, who's a Georgia alum, by the way, is going to accompany me and go through some of the slides. She heads up marketing for us. ATM Direct is the 4th and probably the most relevant alternative payment method on the Internet. We live in the same ecosystem as PayPal, Bill Me Later, Google Checkout, and believe that we're the most relevant in that ecosystem for the simple fact that we have a group of consumers that is close to 200 million in count that are currently activated and enabled without requiring any enrollment to use our product online. We address a terrifically large market, 250 billion in size. The market that we address is the domestic online commerce market. This market is projected to grow to 340 billion by 2011. But the more relevant and important point isn't the size of the market. It's the fact that if you look at the market and dissect that market, debit cards are growing much faster than any other payment type on the Internet, not just domestically, but also internationally. Currently, 40% of online transactions by volume are conducted on debit cards. These debit cards, unfortunately, unlike the point-of-sale world, are not processed as true debit cards. They're actually processed as credit cards, which creates an inherent disbenefit to the merchant as they have to pay a 2 to 4% interchange on those cards that are truly debit cards. Our patented technology brings a first to the Internet. It enables PIN-based debit transactions online. This is not new. We're not trying to revolutionize an industry. Neither are we trying to create a disruptive technology that takes 15 years for consumers to adopt. We're leveraging what is being used today in the point-of-sale world very successfully, and we're moving it to we're moving it to the Internet for online transactions. Our value proposition is very inclusive of all the stakeholders in the payments ecosystem. We enable merchants to save money by reducing their interchange costs. We also enable merchants to reduce their fraud risks. I'll talk a little bit about that. Number 2, we ensure that consumers' private and sensitive information is protected utilizing cryptology and a patented PIN pad that replicates some of the PIN pad functionality that me and you are used to using when we use our debit cards at the point of sale. The product is built on 2 issued patents and a suite of 10 patents that enables a very frictionless consumer checkout process. Our endeavor from day one is to replicate and keep consistent how consumers interact with their merchants. When we go through our process, you'll see that from a consumer standpoint, there's no enrollment, there's no download, there's nothing for the consumer to do but to leverage their card in their pocket, which most of you probably have if you have a DDA bank account, and enter their PIN into our PIN pad. We are very, very fortunate to have the management team that we do. We have a very capable and accomplished management team. Danielle is one of the members of the management team that you'll meet today. We've got individuals like Philip Patrick, who's been in Atlanta for 20 years, has worked at Bell South, Check Free, Global Payments, so on and so forth, and truly is an expert on compliance and security. We've got other individuals that have grown up in the financial services and payment space in Atlanta that reinforce our team. And why is that relevant? That's truly relevant because without a strong team, it's very difficult to commercialize this technology, and it's very difficult to sustain the growth. The pain that we're solving is very, very simple. Merchants are revolting against credit card associations, such as Visa, MasterCard, at the irrational and outrageous pricing model that exists today. Here's why it's irrational. Number one, as an online merchant today, I pay between 2 to 4% to process a simple card-based transaction. Not only that, I carry the risk of all chargebacks and most of the fraud on that transaction. So when I'm a merchant and I'm in the airline space and my margins are so compressed, the 2.5 to 3% on interchange and another % or 2 around the fraud risk that I'm picking up is a significant opportunity in terms of bringing down those costs. So that's number one. Number two is the fact that we want to bring an alternative payment solution that solves the problem that the current alternative payment solutions have. The problem is you're asking consumers to enroll into a new system or a new platform, and you're also asking consumers to escrow their funds into a new account, which is a very difficult proposition. Just by adding the PayPal bug on your website, you certainly, on paper, could potentially save some money, but if there isn't enough critical mass of consumers, it's irrelevant as a payment type for that merchant. So the pain that we're focused on and razor focused on is to reduce the transaction processing costs for merchants, reduce the fraud risk for merchants, and enable consumers to have a frictionless checkout process and secure the sensitive information. We're all engineers, so excuse the charts here, but I'll go through it very simply. How does the product work? Through web services technology, we very quickly integrate with the merchant. As the consumer is going through the checkout process, just like at the point of sale, they're offered the option to run a debit or a credit transaction. If they click on debit, a PIN pad comes up. It smokes the back so nothing can be entered on the website. And unlike any other payment mechanism today, they can only put in their PIN number through mouse clicks. So key logging and phishing attempts through the pickup of keyboard clicks is eliminated. More importantly, at no point do we retain this PIN in memory. We've got a unique patented methodology that securely captures this PIN, and we've got a transport and communication methodology that is three-way that ensures that any man-in-the-middle attacks or phishing or pharming attacks are prevented. But more importantly, it's a 3 to 10 second process for the consumer to enter the PIN. Once the PIN is entered, We pick up the information from the merchant, the card number, the address, the amount, and we pick up the PIN from two separate channels. We build what's called a PIN block, and we send that PIN block to be processed through rails that exist today. The key in this process is we're leveraging all of the infrastructure, the business model, and the business relationships that the merchants have with their acquirers, and putting it online through our PIN pad process. Why is our solution unique? Our solution, we believe, is extremely unique for the following reasons. On day one, we can go to an American Airlines and say, in your portfolio, how many debit transactions are you doing today? 35, 40%? Yeah, okay. What if I could convert just 5% of those transactions to PIN-based transactions? And by the way, what if I could bring incremental transactions in terms of consumers that only have a PIN debit option or are security conscious? Would you be interested? Potentially, based on what your price is. Well, the price is X, which is 60% lower than what you're paying for MasterCard and Visa transactions. And oh, by the way, you're not bearing the risk of the transaction because the PIN is being put in. The fraud risk is being shifted in the majority of the cases to the issuers. There is no shortage of merchants that want to enroll into this platform. Number two, we bring an active set of consumers that don't need to enroll. I think I've talked about that. I think you will understand the adoption challenges of anything new. So that's number two. Number three, and this is very important, for us to have merchant adoption, it's very critical that we run the same rails that those merchants are running today. When we sat down and thought about this, the last thing we wanted to go and talk to American Airlines or Delta Airlines about was, well, this is going to be a 6-month IT project, and you're going to require this guy, and we're going to provide consulting services. No. We wanted to be able to say that within 30 days, maximum 45 days, we're going to have you ready to go to take this payment type. And oh, by the way, you can use the same merchant acquirer that you're using today, and your settlement isn't going to be through any other mechanism, because we don't take custody of the funds. Your settlement is going to be through the same mechanism. And last but not least, this technology is protected by our patent. The patent is very, very important. It allows us to be the only provider that can offer a true, secure, cryptology-based software PIN pad to enable these transactions. Other models exist out there that expect consumers to have something on their flash drive or have a PIN pad that they carry in their bag and connect it to their machine. Totally ridiculous. It's not going to take off. So in terms of why our solution is unique, those are some of the points. And with that said, I'm going to hand over to Danielle to talk about the market.
So we touched a little bit on the market size. It's obviously very large and growing. According to Jupiter Research, in 2011, online consumer spend is going to reach about $342 billion. Just like the growth of online consumer spend, as Nandan already discussed, debit usage is also growing online. In 2007, debit cards surpassed credit cards as the preferred online payment method. This was the first time. This trend is expected to continue. Debit's popularity is due in part for a couple of reasons. Number one, younger consumers are starting to use debit cards more often than credit cards. So we have a generation of consumers that are up and coming who will be using debit for a long time. Number two, debit is now a standard checking account option. Over 72% of Americans have an ATM or debit card, and about 317 million are expected to be issued this year. As Nandan also mentioned, approximately 90 million of these cards are enabled as what's called PIN only. This means they cannot be used without a PIN, thus they cannot be used to pay for internet purchases. The market potential for an internet PIN debit solution is enormous based on the fact that about 42% of debit transactions are online. So if we take a number, let's say 40% of those transactions could be converted to internet PIN debit, and bringing internet PIN debit online would cause 10%, let's say, in incremental transactions. We would be looking at, given online consumer spend, a potential $750 million market for internet PIN debit in 2011. We do face competition. We are the only company so far in the U.S. that we know of that has a software-only service for internet PIN debit. But obviously, our competition comes from current online methods, both standard and alternative payments. Standard methods include credit cards and signature debit cards. From a merchant perspective, they are fraud-prone, and obviously they're very expensive to process. From a consumer perspective, there have been great security concerns, data breaches, and the fact that this data, this credit card data, is not encrypted when it is transmitted over the internet. Alternative payment methods for most mainstream consumers, they are cumbersome to use. They're processed slightly lower than credit and signature debit. ACH is everybody's electronic bank funds transfer, limited to bill pay in certain places like utilities and insurance, and is cumbersome for anything but recurring payments. And while alternative payment methods may be cumbersome for most consumers, we do want to note the enormous growth that they have experienced. PayPal was sold to eBay for $1.5 billion in 2002. Bill Me Later, a relatively new entrant in this space, has over 700 retailers at this time. We believe we can become the fourth and the largest of the alternative payment methods. Talk a little bit about our business model and channel strategy. Our initial model is to partner with merchant acquirers. We're doing this to reach a massive merchants quickly. Partners include Elevon, Chase Payment Tech, and B of A Merchant Services. We intend to focus initially on the top 250 of the top 500 online retailers. Our software is embedded directly into the merchant checkout process. This is key to note because it is a software-only service. It stays at the merchant. There is no redirection, no enrollment. Thus, it keeps the consumer on the merchant website. Installation happens in about 30 to 45 days, and it is done remotely. Our revenue and marketing strategy, revenue model, we have a recurring revenue model based on transaction volume, dollar volume, acquirer activation fees, merchant implementation fees, and monthly hosting fees. Our marketing strategy has two phases. Phase one is currently in effect. We are leveraging mainstream press channels such as press releases, white papers, articles, and conferences currently to get the word out about internet PIN debit. Phase two will come about Q4 2008 and will correspond with our first merchant signing. This is important to note because we will be marketing directly through merchants and merchant acquirers to consumers once we have our first merchant signed. We will take this to mainstream press as evidence of the viability of internet PIN debit, and we do plan to work with our merchants to establish PIN debit reward programs in the future to incentivize consumers to use this payment method. Our management team, as Nandan discussed earlier, he has extensive experience in starting up companies and in payment processing. Our VP of Business Development, Tom Wilkerson, he also has extensive experience in payment processing and extensive relationships with merchants, acquirers, and networks. I have over 10 years of experience in commercializing early-stage technology and marketing. We have about 7 full and part-time employees right now. Our new hires for this year will include a chief technology officer, several key developers, and we have an active advisory board as well.
In terms of our revenue model, as Danielle mentioned, it's a recurring revenue model. We expect to be net income positive in 2010. We're looking to raise between $7 to $12 million in the initial round of funding. And our use of funds is going to be around ensuring that we have the capacity and the scalability. That's one thing that we learned from Harbor Payments, one of the previous companies that I've co-founded, that it's really important to build that scale and capacity early on. So in terms of the use of funds, it's going to be to build scale and capacity, to expand our product suite. We're very focused on the domestic market, but there is a huge international opportunity. If you think about Europe, Canada, China, India, very dominant debit markets. Lastly, we want to expand our management team to bring in industry veterans that know the industry, know the space, and I think it's very important to do that early on. And finally, we want to increase our brand recognition. In terms of traction, we've had terrific traction in the first quarter of our life. We've scheduled and rolled out major conversations with EFT networks and merchant acquirers. I'm proud to announce that a local merchant acquirer and ATM Direct is in contracts to be the first acquirer to take this to their merchants. Number two, we've presented at a variety of very valuable forums. The airline forum was the most memorable to me. I've never run out of business cards after presenting at that forum. There's a tremendous amount of interest from that industry. Great. And we can certainly talk about the milestones and the successes a little bit later. I'm going to close, and I apologize for going over, but we're so passionate about this business, it's difficult to contain ourselves within 20 minutes. So my sincere apologies. Last but not least, we're solving a real problem. We're not trying to create a revolution. We're not trying to be a disruptive technology. We're trying to solve a real problem for merchants that exists today. Number two, we're trying to improve the fraud risks that exist today online without making the process so complicated for the consumers that they need a handbook to operate their involvement in online purchases. And last but not least, we are honored to be an Atlanta company. We believe that we can be a milestone for Georgia in terms of being the fourth and hopefully the largest alternative payments provider in the country.